Welcome back, Bird Gang fans, to the Red Phantom podcast. We'll be talking everything involving the Arizona Cardinals. This week, we'll focus on my thoughts and reactions about the game against the San Francisco 49ers, as well as the upcoming game against the Green Bay Packers. So let's jump straight into things. Let's start off with the first half. I think a lot of people came into this game thinking the Cardinals were going to lose this game in a pretty heavily fashion. I thought so too. I didn't really think our defense was going to play well against this 49ers team, especially with how they played against the Commanders 2 weeks ago. But things actually turned around this week. Drew Petzing let Kyler Murray actually run the ball for once, because that's how we scored our first touchdown. Kyler Murray ran the ball for a 50-yard touchdown, which is his longest of his career. And of course, we didn't have Matt Prater kicking this week, so we had Chad Ryland, a practice squad kicker, kicking for us. And, it's always questionable having a practice squad kicker, especially Chad Ryland, who was 63% of his field goal percentage last year, kicking for the Cardinals against a pretty big divisional rival. But we score 7-3, and, things are looking pretty good. Our defense holds the 49ers to a field goal a little bit after that first drive in the game, and things are looking great. The Cardinals are playing well. The defense is playing great, and, unfortunately, eventually in the first quarter, you have to give up some plays here and there, and George Kittle ends up getting a 4-yard touchdown pass from Brock Purdy. And, the Cardinals were playing pretty conservative for the most part. And, granted, it's the 49ers. I don't think you want to play super aggressive because the Niners are a very, very aggressive team like we've seen in the past couple of games and such. But it worked out in our favor. We go down there, score another field goal, tie the game 10-10, and the Cardinals are keeping in this game, and then everything falls apart in the second quarter. They go out, kick another field goal, cool, and then Chad Ryland gets blocked for a 61-yard touchdown return, which is like I think at that point all the Cardinal fans were just like, great, like we were in this game and now like we're falling apart like we did like the last 3 games. And honestly, that part of the game, I will say for a lot of Cardinal fans, was like the point where it was like, yeah, like this is our normal tradition. We go out there, score our first quarter, and then we don't score the rest of the game, whatever. And, things were turning out, and the Cardinals were slightly driving downfield. And then, of course, we had the RPO bubble screen to James Conner that got picked off by Nick Bosa, of all people. Go figure. And, from that point on, the 49ers go down there, and, of course, they lose Jake Moody from him getting injured trying to tackle DJ Dallas, who, might I add, is a big man. But things turn out well. They go and do their thing, play great, whatever the case may be. And, they have to put in Mitch Wishnowsky out there to kick a field goal, which I don't think any team wants to go out and have their punter kick a field goal. And for those of you who don't understand kicking and punting, those are 2 very, very different things. And I know NFL broadcasters and commentators, when they talk about kicking, they always go, well, you think a punter would kick a field goal and they would be great? No. Trust me, it's way harder than you think it is. There's so many elements that go into kicking that don't go into punting. So when you're kicking a field goal, you also have to rely on the holder, which is what happened with the Bengals game when they missed the kick. You have to rely on the wind, which is another huge factor in making the kick. And you also have to rely on kicking placement, which is a certain part of the ball you have to kick and locking your ankle as you kick that ball. And those tasks are not easy if especially the motions are completely different. So adding those 2 things together, it's a very different concept for punting and kicking. So I get why the Niners didn't use Mitch Wishnowsky to kick a bunch of field goals, but it worked out in our favor. Go out there after the third quarter, Chad Ryland kicks another field goal. We're down 10 points, and things are looking up. And we actually scored in the third quarter, which is great to see. And there was a couple of big key moments there that helped the team, move to where they were. Like the interception from Mac Wilson that helped put us in that field goal range. And then, of course, the 49ers going on at 4th down and turning over the ball puts us in, decent position only because they couldn't kick the field goal because of Mitch Wishnowsky from 4th and 23. And I was listening to the radio at that point because I wasn't at home watching the game. I was out and about somewhere. But they were talking about how the 49ers try to implement George Kittle on that 4th and 23 pass to get us trapped inside of our own, goal line. And It didn't work out, thankfully, because Kittle dropped the ball. And, we're still at like the Cardinals' 40-yard line at the time the play happens and everything. But we go down there, score a touchdown. My mistake. We go down there, score a touchdown. Great, offensive run scheme with Kyler Murray pretending to take off the ball. Chucks it to Elijah Higgins, who catches the touchdown. Who surprisingly has more touchdowns than Trey McBride at this point. And it's a 4-point game at this point, and the Cardinals decide to go for two. And I think a lot of people were kind of nervous at that point because you don't get it, you're down a touchdown still, and I think a lot of people would rather have settled for an extra point, tie the game, whatever. But it worked out in the Cardinals' favor. They get the 2-point conversion with James Conner, making it a 2-point game. And our biggest play of the game, in my opinion, was when Jordan Mason fumbled the ball at the red zone. And I think at that point, a lot of Cardinal fans started to realize, like, this is our game. Like, we have a chance to win this game. And, Jordan Mason is one of the better rushers of the game so far in the NFL. And it's shocking to say that because when CMC comes back, the whole offense is going to be revitalized. But Jordan Mason is definitely not a running back you want to mess around with. And I think up until that point, I think he was turnover free, which having that fumble was a huge deal for the Cardinals because it had all the momentum on our side. We kicked the field goal, scored a touchdown, stopped them on fourth and 23, just fumbled the ball. Now we have all the momentum going on our side. Plenty of time on the clock to go down there, kick a game-winning field goal. But I think a lot of fans were also nervous because, Chad Ryland just had his field goal kick blocked previously and, barely made the other field goal before in the third quarter. And it was one of those things where I think a lot of Cardinal fans wanted them to go and score a touchdown just to make it where the 49ers didn't have to score a field goal to win the game. Because I think a lot of people were scared that, our secondary wasn't great enough to stop, Brandon Ayuk, who had a great game, unfortunately, against us. And, George Kittle and Juan Jennings and Deebo Samuel, who are all great catchers for the 49ers. But it's just one of those things where you want to have more comfort than, just a slight point to win the game. And fortunately for us, we got the field goal off, which was almost blocked again. And we go down there, put pressure on the 49ers to go downfield with no timeouts. And, the first play of the drive didn't look great. I mean, it was a 15-yard pass to George Kittle, and it was almost in field goal range at that point. And, Nick Rallis, give him props because he held them shut. He shut them out the entire second half of the game. Goes out there, sends a blitz with Jalen Thompson, hits Brock Purdy, gets picked off by Kaiser White to end the game. And I know for those who have seen my Instagram, oh man, it was spectacular. I mean, I was jumping up and down for joy. I was going crazy. I mean, this was a moment that I think a lot of Cardinal fans needed to see. And it's the fact that, our team might not be the most talented, but we still get stuff done on the field. I mean, we've seen it time and time again, but just things weren't clicking in the last couple weeks. And I mean, after the Commanders game, I think there was a spark that was lit that was like, hey, we just got humiliated by the Commanders. We can't go out and lose to the 49ers, or we can't, give up that many points again this season. Like, we just lost 14-42 or 41, whatever the case may be. But we can't go out there and lose again that badly the rest of the season. Because I think after that point, I think a lot of Cardinal fans were very, disappointed with how the season was going. We start off 1-3, and then we have a hard, couple of weeks with the 49ers, the Packers, and the Chargers the next 3 weeks or 2 weeks, I should say now. And I think a lot of fans were thinking, the Cardinals were going to go 1-5 during that 5-week stint between, week 1 to the Packers, which is next week. And thankfully, we pulled off a win against the 49ers, and now we're here talking about the game. And speaking of which, Kyler Murray actually had a really good game this week. And I'll give props to, Drew Petzing for allowing Kyler Murray to run the ball a little bit more, because this week he had 7 carries for 83 yards and a touchdown. I mean, granted, 50 of those yards were on that one touchdown run that he had. And James Conner, I mean, give him props. That first half was horrendous for him, but he came out there second half and he had a monster game the second half. Definitely punishing the 49ers defense on the run. And I think a lot of 49er fans were very nervous with that running duo with Kyler Murray and James Conner because it's always such a dangerous game between the two of them. And I think, especially looking at the 49ers fan base, I think a lot of people were scared between those two players because they've seen that they can deal pressure to the 49ers and keep them in the close game like they were last week. And they did. I mean, we won the game, and it's great. But, receiving-wise, Michael Wilson was the leading receiver, 78 yards, 5 catches. McBride, 6 catches for 53 yards. Marvin Harrison had 2 catches for 36 yards and 7 targets. Granted, he had that one great play on 4th and 10 to keep us in the game. But, I don't know if it's, targeting or sending Marv on wrong routes, like just go route to double team with corner and safety or whatever the case may be. But we need him to have more, underneath middle yard passes, whatever the case may be. 5-yard, 10-yard passes, not 20-yard bombs. And I think that's what they did with Michael Wilson, which worked out great because Michael Wilson had himself a game. And if you guys remember last season, he had a career game, I would say, against the 49ers. 2 touchdowns, and he had like 140 yards or something like that. Absolutely great game. So, I mean, I'll give props this receiving core because they played great, especially against, a 49ers defense that, isn't very injured. And, you have Nick Bosa, Fred Warner, Charvarius Ward. I think Hufunga was playing that game. Leonard Floyd. And, the offensive line held up. I mean, granted, we lost Will Hernandez, unfortunately, because he got rolled over by Nick Bosa. And, he's going to be out for the season. But I'll give them props. They held up their own. And, the receiving corps played great. James Conner played great, like I mentioned. And everything was just rolling this game. And I'm glad to see there was some fire under the Cardinals after our devastating loss against the Commanders 2 weeks ago. Because this team showed up to play. And, Lucetta was playing because Xavier Thomas couldn't play. Made out there and made the best play of the game, making Jordan Mason fumble the ball in the red zone. And I think, granted, that turned the entire tide of the game around. Naquan Jones got a sack. Kaiser Barnes got a sack. Budda Baker had 12 tackles. And just looking at this team, I mean, like I said, there's not a lot of talent, but with all the injuries going on in the NFC West, the division is wide open for the Cardinals to come and take the division. I mean, nothing's stopping them. If they can play like they did against the 49ers the rest of the season, which is going to be hard just because, you have the Packers, you have the Dolphins, you have the Rams again when they're all healthy, you have San Francisco again, you have Seattle later in the season when, they're going to be all healthy, and just it's going to be a tough competition later on in the year. But I think after the Packers game this next week, we're going to be, pretty easy schedule. I mean, Chargers are pretty injured. Dolphins don't have Tua. They've been playing not so great. The Bears are kind of spiking up a little bit. That's going to be a hard game. The Jets just lost their head coach and demoted their offensive coordinator, so we'll see how that turns out. The Vikings are 5-0. I mean, that's going to be a tough game. Patriots are rebuilding. Panthers are, the Panthers. But the division, it looks great. I mean, we are right there to do something to make the division, competitive again. And I think we are no longer the laughingstock of this NFC West. And it's funny because I'm in this NFC West meme group chat or whatever, and a lot of people give crap to the Cardinals because they're like, oh, you're a baseball team, the St. Louis Cardinals, whatever. But after being 2-0 in the division, I think a lot of people are saying, wow, this Cardinal team really isn't a team you want to mess around with because they will come over and ruin your day. And we saw that. I mean, 24-23 victory over the 49ers is definitely an amazing feat you want to have. And, next week hopefully we'll have Matt Prater come back kicking for us. It's going to be a different offensive line without Will Hernandez, who I think was playing great this season. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see what happens next year with his contract year being this year. So hopefully he'll be back by the time the season starts next year. If not, it's going to be unfortunately time to move on and find a replacement for him. But I would love to have him back on the team next year if he is, healthy, if he is ready to play. Maybe put him on like the PUP or whatever it is. But we need Will Hernandez back. I think his leadership is there. His fire. I mean, even at training camp, he's always getting into fights with someone because his passion for football is there. And I love that he has that passion because he really cares about the team. And, it's going off to like Paris Johnson, who loves the team. It's feeding off to, Evan Brown and Hiote Froholt. And just looking at this team with the offensive line it has, I mean, it's definitely creating something. And it's great seeing what the team has become, like I said. But it's going to be, one of those years where we might miss the playoffs by a slight margin. But if we can just make slight victories like we did last week, I think a lot of people will be interested in what the Cardinals have in stock. And, I think this week against the 49ers was a huge part in playing that game because I think after we upset the 49ers, I think a lot of teams are like, wow, the Cardinals are really doing something in the desert. Like, let's go check them out. And, I know I keep saying that. I've said that in the last episode and the episode before that. But just looking at this team and how they've been playing, I mean, what's going to stop this team? I mean, granted, is it going to be like some bad plays here and there like we saw against the Commanders? Probably. Is it going to be, questionable play calling? I mean, every team has questionable play calling. But it's one of those things where if they can get clicking, they're going to be good for the talent that they have. And I think a good comparison to this team is the New York Giants when Brian DeBoer became the head coach for them. Because, there wasn't a lot of talent on that team, but they were still able to make plays. They're still able to play against great teams and win against them. And I think the Cardinals are in that same boat where, there's not a lot of talent, but there's enough talent to get stuff rolling for the Cardinals to make plays against huge division rivals. And, Marvin Harrison still, adapting into the NFL role of being wide receiver one. McBride's in his second year. He's still somewhat developing into that role. Trey McBride is definitely getting more touches now with being the starting tight end from last year. And James Conner and Murray, two veteran presence that you like to have on the team. And then you look at our defensive side of the ball. I mean, our whole secondary is rookies. And, granted, Garrett Williams didn't play. Keicho Clark played great. We saw a little bit of Max Melton, who played great. We saw Sean Murphy-Bunting play decent. We saw, Starling Thomas play decent. And just seeing how the team is performing with how young the team is, it's definitely looking brighter for stuff to happen in the future. And I know I just saw a couple days ago that the Raiders are now in like complete rebuild mode, where they just benched Gardner Minshew for Aiden O'Connell. So there is a chance that the Cardinals could get themselves Max Crosby, which would be an absolutely great thing to help the Cardinals, defensive line out. And, it might take a couple of draft picks to pick him up. I think maybe a first, maybe a second, depending on what his contract looks like. But that's definitely a player you need for this Cardinals defensive front, because with BJ Ojulari, I mean, Darius Robinson's coming back from IR, not this week, but I think he might be back next week against the Chargers. And, Zay Jones is coming back next week against the Chargers. It's one of those things where we have to see how Darius Robinson plays, because we kind of know how BJ's going to play. But if Darius Robinson plays well, I think adding on Max Crosby with Robinson and Ojulari, I mean, that's already a really great defensive front right there. And then, with Dante Stills playing the way he is, it's definitely making sure that something's going on, because that defensive front is going to be something in the future that no one's going to want to mess around with. But I'm going to end it for the 49ers. We're going to move right on to the Packers for the next week. So looking ahead into week 3, we have the Green Bay Packers, like I've mentioned earlier. And, the Packers are definitely a team you don't want to mess around with. I mean, Jordan Love just came back from injury 2 weeks ago, and he's playing at a really great level, I would say. I mean, turnover wise, he's not playing super well, but, you know, 873 yards in 3 games, almost 300 yards passing per game. That's a pretty impressive stat for the receivers that you have. I mean, Jaden Reed's been playing well, 414 yards in the season, 2 touchdowns. The emergence of Tyler Kraft at tight end with, 218 yards and 3 touchdowns. That's, a little concerning. And, you have Romeo Dobbs coming back with 169 yards, no touchdowns, who was suspended last week against the Rams. You have Dontarian Wicks, who's coming back, and Christian Watson, who's coming back from injury. And I would say Christian Watson's a pretty big impact on that game with his size and speed that he has. But it's going to be interesting seeing how the Cardinals match up against this Packers receiving core. And rushing, I mean, you have Josh Jacobs, who has 400 yards with 1 touchdown, I should say. You have Josh Jacobs, who has 402 yards and 1 touchdown, which hasn't been too spectacular. I mean, for what the Packers are giving him, it's not the greatest production. I mean, he's still averaging 4.5 yards a carry, and, he's still playing at a decent level. Granted, you have 2 fumbles with a fumble lost, but it's definitely a little bit of a concerning running back from, the Cardinals defensive front, who surprisingly held Jordan Mason to only like 89 yards or something like that, which is phenomenal. But with this team, I feel like anywhere is going to be a threat. I know I said that last week with Brock Purdy and the 49ers, with Jordan Mason, Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, George Kittle, and all that. But I feel like this week in particular is the week where you really cannot underestimate the quarterback. I mean, Jordan Love's getting paid almost the highest amount for a reason in NFL history, and it's because the Packers saw what he could do last season as he started his first ever season as a starter for the Packers, and he really showed himself what he could do with the 49ers. He really showed the Packers what he could do for this team. And he goes out 2 weeks or 3 weeks, I should say, he goes out 2 weeks with an MCL sprain, and, Malik Willis comes in, and I think a lot of Packer fans were like, oh, this team's over. But he goes out there and wins 2 straight games. And, props to Matt LaFleur, because I don't know how you managed to make Malik Willis look like that great of a quarterback, but you did. And now Jordan Love's back with, I would say a healthier team, I would say, but definitely something to be concerned with. And, defensively, Xavier McKinley's been a ball hawk. I mean, he has 5 picks on the season already. I think that leads the NFL. And, Quay Walker is definitely playing a little bit of a better role at linebacker. I mean, he leads the team in tackles with 40. You have Isaiah McDuffie, who's been playing great. And, just seeing how the team's been progressing, so on and so forth. Preston Smith still on the team, still playing well for his age. Kenny Clark's playing great. Rashawn Gary's playing great. It's just a matter of how is this offense going to play against this defense. And I think this game is going to be a very high-scoring game. And I wouldn't be shocked if it was, because I don't feel like either of these defenses are that great. I mean, hell, the Packers almost lost to the Rams last week. I mean, the Packers barely scratched out a win 24-19 against the Rams. And I wouldn't even say the Rams are that great of a team. But then you look at 2 weeks ago, and they almost beat the Vikings. I mean, they lost by 2 points. So I think defensively, this front's going to have to put pressure on Jordan Love a little bit, because we saw what happened with the Vikings. I mean, he got put under pressure, and he was making some throws, but I think they did a little too long where he was adapting to that pressure and making plays to almost come back against the Vikings. But, I think the matchups are there for the team. I mean, Tucker Kraft will be guarded by Kaiser White, I would say majority of the game. I won't say all the game, because, you still have Mac Wilson, and you still have, Buda Baker and all that. But it's just a matter of scheming. And with Jaden Reed, I mean, you really can't underestimate him, because he right now has 110 yards rushing with 2 touchdowns. So you really can't take away from the fact that Jayden Reed is a dual threat receiver who can run the ball, who can run downfield and make excellent catches. And just watching him play, I mean, there's so many things you can do with this offense, and I think the Cardinals defense is going to have a hard time, playing the pass, playing the run, whatever the case may be, with running the ball with Jayden Reed or Josh Jacobs. I mean, like I said, Josh Jacobs hasn't been playing spectacular, but he's been playing well enough to keep the Packers' rush game alive somewhat. And I think the Cardinals need to stay true to that rush game, because if they don't, then they're going to get ran all over the place. But at the same time, you need to start watching, the receivers, and especially with, Romeo Doubs coming back and, Christian Watkins coming back, as well as, the emergence of Tucker Kraft, like I just mentioned. I mean, the receiving core is nothing you want to mess around with. And I think last week against the Rams, we kind of saw, those players not playing and how big of an absence those players were. So I think it's going to be a little bit of a scarier matchup against the Packers. And, it's in Lambeau Field, so that's always a mismatch to begin with, because the city of Green Bay loves the Packers. I think everyone knows that. I mean, hell, their whole team is owned by the literal city of Green Bay. So that tells you how much that fan base really cares about the Packers. So it's not going to be easy going into Lambeau Field beating the Packers. I mean, we did it a few years ago with Josh Rosen, and I think we saw after that the Packers were like, nope, and fired Mike McCarthy, which is absolutely hilarious. But just this team is going to be a team you are not going to want to mess around with. I think the biggest player on the team is Xavier McKinley, who's been playing phenomenal so far. And he's the sole reason they beat the Rams last week. I mean, he had a pick and a fumble recovery back-to-back to end the game. And without him, I think, the Rams would win the game. But, it is what it is. It's any given Sunday. I mean, we did the same thing against the 49ers. I'm pretty sure people are like, well, if the 49ers had their kicker, they would have beat you. But so it is what it is. But it's going to be a tougher matchup this week with the Packers, like I keep mentioning. And I really do think it's going to be a high-scoring game. I think if Drew Petzing can come up here and call the same game like he did against the Packers or against the 49ers, I think the Cardinals are going to be in business to do a lot of damage against this Packers front. And I would go to show that, Kyler Murray, he's made some poor decisions throwing the ball recently, but I will say he's been a lot smarter throwing the ball. I mean, he only has 2 interceptions on the season right now, which is a lot better than he's been doing, years previously. And, he has 7 touchdowns on the season. So he's been playing a lot smarter. And, you have James Conner and, your new wide receiver with Marvin Harrison Jr. And, with Michael Wilson playing great and, Trey McBride coming back on injury. Trey McBride coming back and stepping up as the tight end role like he did last week. I think there's going to be some great plays in the making there. And then, of course, you have Greg Dortch, who, didn't really have a factor last week, but I think he'll have a factor this week. And just building off with the team's momentum last week, I think there's a great chance that the Cardinals could pull off a win. But like I said, it's going to be a challenge, especially with Jordan Love playing the way he has been playing. But I'll give it up to Nick Rallis. I mean, he's been playing phenomenal with the defense that he has. He's had 3 interceptions so far, or 4 interceptions so far, I should say. And, I don't think there's any doubt in my mind that they could have some turnovers against Jordan Love this week. And especially with the run game, how it was last week, I wouldn't be shocked to see if Josh Jacobs didn't really have that great of a game this week. But like I said, Jordan Love is a great pocket passer, so he's probably going to have more, plays down the field rather than just running the ball. Like I said, it's going to be the Cardinals have to stay true to the run game. They're going to have some play actions after some big plays here and there. But like I said, I think with the scheme that Nick Rallis is playing so far on the defensive front, I think they're able to get pressure on Jordan Love. And Kyler Murray, like I said, your biggest factor in the game is his legs. And we saw that last week with the 49ers after, they got killed by the Commanders. And I think Drew Petzing needs to build off of that with the rushing attack and continue running the ball. Granted, it's not going to work every single time. We saw that with the 49ers game. James Conner, I think, only had 20 yards rushing the first half, and then he had 77 the second half. But it's one of those games where you're going to have to do both. You're going to have to run the ball a lot. You're going to have to pass the ball a lot, make some play actions, make some read options, whatever the case may be. So it'll be an interesting game, in week 6, especially at Lambeau Field. I mean, early morning game. Thankfully, it's not super cold there because I know that's a huge factor in Lambeau, but it's still going to have a huge, huge problem for the Cardinals going to this game. So I won't say the Cardinals won't win, because we saw it last week where they blew out, or they barely beat the 49ers, and that was a surprise in itself. But I think they could pull away a win, like I keep mentioning, but I do think the Packers are going to win this game. Especially with Bilal Nichols being questionable, our defensive tackle, I should say. So whoever's filling in his role, if he can't go, I think that'll be a huge missed opportunity for us. And then, of course, Will Hernandez not playing, that's going to be a big problem going into this game with, Kenny Clark and that defensive line. Paris Johnson's been playing great. I won't worry about him too much. Beacham's been serviceable. He's a little questionable. So it'll depend how he plays. Evan Brown's been playing great. Hielte Froholt's been playing great. But, kicker's another questionable thing. Matt Prater, I don't know if he's going to be back or not. That's, something you don't want to see from your place kicker, just because with how accurate and how good Matt Prater's been, I mean, you don't want to have Ryland go out there against this Packers defense and, have a couple of blocked kicks like we did last week. But it's very real that we could have Matt Prater out again this week. On the bright side, we do have Garrett Williams back this week, who is our starting slot corner who didn't play last week. So I think the secondary will play slightly better than it did this week against the 49ers. But like I said, it'll still be one of those games where it's going to be a hard-fought battle. And the Packers with Jair Alexander, if he doesn't play, I think that'll be a huge opportunity for the Cardinals passing game, just because you're not going to have a one-on-one against Jair Alexander and Marvin Harrison Jr., and then you can focus on the rest of the team. So if Jair Alexander doesn't play, I think that's a huge opportunity for the Cardinals that they should take on with passing the ball downfield. But if he does, it's going to be a harder passing attack game. Same thing with Christian Watkins. I know he's on track to play this week, so it's going to be one of those games, like I said. But, final score of the game, I think, like I said, it'll be a high-scoring game. I wouldn't be shocked if it was like 38-35 or something like that, or who knows what the score is. But I know the Packers' place kicker hasn't been amazing. I know he's missed a couple of kicks here and there, but I do think the Packers will pull off a win, but it'll be, like I said, a close game. Anyways, I think that's going to end this week's episode of the Rand Phantom Podcast. Be sure to check out my Instagram, my TikTok, my Twitter, whatever the case may be. You want to check out the video of me going crazy against the 49ers last week. It'll be on my Instagram page. Go check that out. I mean, absolutely losing my mind, screaming, jumping all over the place, whatever the case may be. But that'll be the end of this week. So stay tuned for next week after the Packers. We'll talk more about that going into next week, as well as the Chargers game on Monday Night Football, which is great that the Cardinals have a primetime game this year after, not having the last 2 years. But it'll be a great game for the Packers, or for the Cardinals, on Monday Night Football against the Chargers team if they pull off a win this week. If not, it'll still be a great matchup for the Chargers on Monday Night Football. But it'll be a tough competition. I think it'll be a great game for the Cardinals. I think we'll see what this team's really built of after this Packers game. But that's the Red Phantom tuning out until next week.